think it's a mixed reaction. For some, we've gotten some wins. For others, we're still struggling. Wins in the areas of being able to sit down with your regulators and with your National Assembly members to discuss the space. I think we're doing well in that regards. We've also been able to see some progress in terms of reform of some laws around freedom of association. We need to deepen those progress. But in terms of freedom of expression, we're seeing the use of the Cyber Crimes Act or Cyber Crimes Law. And again, progress there. The ECOWAS Commission mandated the Nigerian government to do some reviews, and I think we've now seen that review in the 2024 reform of the Cyber Crimes Act. But we still have a police that is still, making use of the old law. So there's a gap there. Of course, we should also mention that the law was only just reviewed between February and March. So it means that they've not been on top of what the new law looks like. But again, there's opportunity for raising awareness and also for ensuring that citizens understand what cyber stalking means. And that, some of the issues or examples that we see locally being used by the police as examples of cyber stalking, they are already taken out of the new reform of that law, which has been signed into law by the president. Of course, poverty continues to grow, but you can also not isolate that from the cost of living crisis, the subsidy removal, which again technically is returned now, and also the energy crisis, and the new forms of poverty that we're seeing in the country at this time, what I call energy crisis, and now the new one, furniture crisis. All right. But whatever it is, I do think we're resilient. But again, there's a limit to the resilience that you can say. In terms of assembling, we've seen protests, that have happened as a result of the economic crisis. We've also seen the police managing this protest differently. For example, in Lagos, there was a protest around the cost of living crisis, and we were all agitated that these might escalate. However, the police decided to do something differently. They allowed the protest, which again they can't say no to, but they started giving water and biscuit, bottled water and biscuit. That was a de-escalation strategy, but it was also something that we should mention as part of strategies that the police used during that period to be able to ensure that citizens can protest, and while protesting, we can de-escalate or prevent the outbreak of violence. We've also seen an increase in how the police engage on social media in terms of dealing with complaints and feedbacks. While that can also be better improved upon, but I do think that we should also mention that as part of citizens' engagement, the police is also doing that. So it's a mixed bag. While we are progressing in some, we're backsliding in some, and we're not doing too well in some. So it's a mixed bag. Well, I think at the UN level, there are also a lot of issues we need to pay attention to. The intergovernmental processes, we're told, are intergovernmental. However, we need to find space for how to ensure that while they're intergovernmental, we can bring the voices of the people. And the UN's founding principle is around we the peoples, right? So how do we bring the voice of the people into those intergovernmental negotiations? And that's why we're in support of, the creation of the Office of a UN Envoy on Civil Society that helps civil society to advocate for more spaces for civil society voices. Because whether you like it or not, civil society organizations illuminate the issues. And for me, the UN is a place where we can find common ground based on multilateralism, respect for diversity, and then common solutions. But if the voices are missing, if the entry point for getting that common ground is not there, then I think the UN is missing on how it can help to ensure that development gets to the doorsteps of the common man. And in terms of grassroots engagement, I think we also now need to do more as national associations or as organizations with access and influence to the UN, how we bring in the voices of our members to bear on some of the policies that we're reviewing, or when there are UN consultations, how are we ensuring that we're leaving no one behind? How do we ensure also that our governments at the national level pay attention to grassroots voices in many of the negotiations that they will get themselves involved in on the floor of the United Nations? If there's anything, progress on the attainment of the SDGs has been slow. I recall that we've also had a pandemic. However, pre or post-pandemic, I'm not sure we're doing too well in terms of implementing the goals. Where I have a little bit of frustration is how civil society organizations have not been able to mobilize enough for our government to do the needful. And I'll tell you why. The experience from the MDGs up until the SDGs showed that we had very vibrant campaigns, all right, very well resourced by the UN, the NNNGO community, national civil society organizations, such that we could keep the momentum on. I do totally agree that with the SDGs, there's a new framing, there's a new thinking where we need to track progress on the ground. And the capacity for tracking progress may not necessarily be there. Because for me, I think the SDGs is both knowledge-based, data-driven, and we must be able to track all of that within the elements of how many people are poor at this time, the statistical data that needs to be collected, but also the citizens' data that needs to be collected as well. And how do we use all of that in being able to sit at the table with policymakers and say, hey, here are the numbers. This is what the statistical numbers are telling us. This is what the citizens' data is telling us. What needs to be done? What innovation needs to come in? What ideas do we need to put on the table? And how do we co-create solutions, but also ensuring that we have our independence and we can jointly monitor each other? I think there needs to be a strong shift in how, as civil society organizations, we engage with government on the attainment of the SDGs. I've always said it, we need to find ways of balancing collaboration with confrontation. There's a part where we need to sit at the table and work with government on policies and also implementation, plus also tracking. There's also the part where when this is not working, we're humble enough to say we co-created something that is not working. How do we address it? And if we're both backsliding, there's also the role of calling each other out. And when we need to get on the streets, get on the streets.